All right, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Talking Trout. It's another Wednesday, another month has gone by, and we're excited to have you with us tonight. We're going to be talking about angler science tonight. There's a pretty cool new app out there that folks in the Driftless have started using, and we're going to kind of get an overview on what that app is and what it does and what it can tell us, and how we as anglers can access that and use it to be a part of this data collection and kind of see where we go with it and what we can do with it. So pretty excited about that. Again, if you got questions, by all means, drop them in the chat box. We'll get to them afterwards, after the presentation. And I'm really excited to have Dan Dauwalter from Trout Unlimited Science team here, and then Ken Johnson from the Kiap-TU-Wish TU chapter in Northwest Wisconsin, who's been kind of leading up the efforts for the pilot program, so to speak, for this new monitoring system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our guests, Dan and Kent, and let you guys take it away.
All right. Well, thanks for the kind introduction. Yeah, Dan Dauwalter. I'm with our TU Science program. I actually sit in Boise, Idaho. Title is Fisheries Science Director. Not that that's meaningful, but what is meaningful is I did grow up in the Twin Cities, so you might hear a "you betcha" or "don't you know" Minnesota accent coming out. But what we'd like to cover today is an effort that we've been working on, and maybe for even at least 4 years, maybe come up on 5. Again, this WISE H2O app, which was developed by a company called Mobile H2O, which is essentially a mom and pop startup. Carter and Sarah Borden. Carter is the principal, Sarah's his wife. They walked into our office here in Boise. They're located in Boise, and said, "Hey, we're developing this app to do water quality testing and monitoring at sort of a coarse scale. We think it's the perfect thing for TU. Are you all potentially interested?" And we said yes. And given its, one of its focuses is on, nutrients, we wanted to potentially deploy it in an agricultural landscape, and that landed us in the Driftless. I mean, I'm in Boise, but our science program has always worked nationwide. I've kind of been the Midwestern and Driftless point person within our program. So it was a logical place to land. And we had some active chapters, an active restoration program, and active folks like Kent, who will chime in here about halfway through on some of the monitoring plans that we've developed. So that's sort of the backdrop of how we got started on this program, how we ended up in the Driftless. Because again, we know that there's legacy impacts, a lot of sedimentation issues. We have agricultural encroachment on some of the Driftless streams, and we have fertilizer and manure applications on farm fields. And some of these things have led to the map shown on the right, which is the streams that are listed as impaired under the federal 303D list, listed for sediment, nutrients, temperature, or some combination of those factors. So perfect place to deploy a mobile application that tests water quality for some of these things that we know are happening on the landscape. So it's really an app that you can download for free on any phone, Android, Apple. Its sort of key feature is that it leverages this test strip technology, the same thing you would test the water quality in your pool or hot tub, if you're lucky enough to have those things. You lay the test strip on the calibration card, take a picture, and it'll translate those colors on the test strip with the background colors and translate those into water quality values. So, background water quality like pH, alkalinity, hardness, that sort of reflect the underlying geology in the region, but also nitrates, nitrites. There's sort of an external phosphorus kit that we deploy with it, which is sort of done outside the app, but you can enter that information and it will translate those values into sort of meaningful interpretations and give you a sense of what's happening in the stream where you just took a measurement. So as I was mentioning, the key features are sort of these top 5 analytes, where it's using a colorimetric algorithm to translate colors from the test strips into water quality values at a sort of a coarse scale. We do supply a orthophosphate test strip, which is done outside of the app, but you can enter the information into the app. You can enter temperature, take a photograph of the site, document any sort of disturbances that are typically related to water quality. So whether you're seeing bank erosion, in which bank soils can have phosphorus bound to them that can be released once it becomes wetted again. Are there cows in the stream? What's the water level, water clarity? Has there been a runoff event recently? And things, just additional information to help interpret the water quality elements of the app. So we had this interest with this company in engaging with our science program and our, to use vast volunteer base. We ended up in the Driftless. We said, let's do a pilot program to see if people or chapter folks or members are really willing to go out and collect this sort of data. And so we started with the Kiap-TU-Wish chapter, an active chapter, and Kent was working with Jeff Hastings at the time doing other monitoring assist work for TU DARE, and it sort of became the perfect pairing. So we did in 2019, I think early March, went out and did a sort of training, set up a monitoring plan, which Kent will talk about later, where we have target anglers that will go and do repeated monitoring once a month at specific locations throughout Pierce County. So the domain of the Kiap-TU-Wish chapter, as well as general anglers that would just sort of collect data as they were out fishing on streams. We ended up with 60 observations, people participating, contributing in different ways, using the test strips, doing the orthophosphate test, entering that information in the app. And it was a success. And so in 2020, despite COVID coming into our lives, the idea was to have a driftless area expansion, engage new chapters. The COVID stuff was a little bit of a hiccup, but we made contact with a bunch of chapters. We had funding to supply free test kits, 2 chapters to get them engaged in seed use by our membership. Kiap-TU-Wish was on board for another year. We made some improvements to the app. We sort of broadcast what we're doing through webinars, the Driftless Symposium, etc. Mobile H2O set up a store on their website, which is temporarily down at the moment. Because Carter's out of country, but we're working with them to get kits into folks' hands who have plans to help out this upcoming season. 2021 continued, added new chapters with monitoring plans. Again, Kent will touch on those plans here in a little bit, but Twin Cities TU, Hiawatha TU out of Rochester, again, another Driftless Symposium training, some webinars, and we continued through last year. There's fewer bullet points. We had some turn, Jeff retired, Sarah Strassman came on board. We just had to continue, but the idea is for this thing to sort of be self-perpetuating. So do less hand-holding up front, onboard more folks, more chapters, get them involved and let the thing run itself. And so through last fall, we've had a total of 1,063 observations made across the Driftless area. You don't quite see 1,000 points on this map because a lot of these locations have up to, well, basically one observation per month. And in the case of the Kiap-TU-Wish domain in the north there, multiple observations per month for 4 years now. So a lot of those are hidden behind each other, but we have over 1,000 observations in the database. We have good participation from some chapters. We can clearly see some lull in sort of the southern Driftless area and more of our rural areas, rural chapters. But we're continuing to see participation and basically crowdsourcing of a data set around water quality. We've been onboarding new folks, collecting observations each year. So 2019 we had 16 folks in Kiap-TU-Wish. We doubled that in 2020. We've been at around 80 for this past summer in 2022. So we're, been increasing, and we've plateaued a little bit. Our strategy for outreach has sort of evolved over time. But we're continuing to get new people on board and seeing over, like as you see on the right here, between 5 and 8 observations per user. And that's sort of held steady over, the last couple of years. This graph shows basically a frequency histogram of the number of observations made per observer. So when you download the app on your phone, you have a unique ID that's tied to you, and so you can track how many observations were made per person. And orange is 2020, light blue is 2021, dark blue is 2022. And you can see the number of observations made per observer in 2022 had a significant bump here in 22, and the bars are higher in 21 and 22 than they were in that sort of initial regional kickoff in 2020. So most folks make, between 1 and 5 measurements, or a handful that are between, 6 and 15. And we have a couple super users out there, those that have engaged in the monitoring plan for multiple years now, monitoring once a month at the same place over that up to 4-year period. So we're seeing good use. We have reasonable geographic coverage, but we do have some gaps. We've been seeding participation or encouraging use the last 2 Septembers by doing the September Blitz, where if you make an observation, you get an entry into a drawing for some TU swag. If you make an entry on a native brook trout stream, you get 2 entries per observation. So trying to focus people on our native brook trout streams and resource to encourage collection on those resources. But these September blitzes, I think the numbers are more or less the same between 2021 and 22. So in 22, we had 86 observations made by 27 different people. Unfortunately, only one person from Wisconsin was in the top 3, but they all got a little piece of swag, including, actually, I don't think Harold claimed the reel, so they got to pick their prize. Eric Hansen ended up with the Reddington reel and the pack and beanie, which he's wearing in this photo, and clearly made an observation on the stream, but it also has capability of pulling in a fish too. So putting that reel to use, but just another sort of aspect of the program where we're trying to draw people in and get them to contribute to this crowdsourced database on water quality in the Driftless. So that, I mentioned Hiawatha, Kiap-TU-Wish, Twin Cities, they all have formal monitoring programs, and you can look at the numbers up and down this table, and they're the ones with the most observations, probably not surprisingly. But you can see that ramp up with when they onboarded. Again, Kiap-TU-Wish started out, with a pilot in 2019, made quite a few observations. That's held steady, and actually doubled last year in 2022. And these other chapters, Hiawatha and Twin Cities, are sort of catching up. They have formal monitoring plans, and those that don't are sort of, I won't say limping along, but contributing, but not nearly at the level of those that have formal monitoring programs. We also have some DNR folks and other organizations collecting data too. So that's what this bottom row represents. So I'll turn it over to Kent now, and Kent will sort of walk through the monitoring plans of these 3 highlighted chapters and sort of cover the details and how they've been driving sort of this level of participation in the last 3 years. Kent.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to you, Mike, for the invitation to present this evening. Dan mentioned one of the primary reasons behind the app being the ability to crowdsource with it and generate data where data has never been generated before across the landscape. So the ability of observers to wander, fish, make observations as they go is a really powerful approach to obtaining water quality, habitat, information that has never been obtained in these locations before. And so it's fun to kind of see the map begin to populate with observation sites. But there's always a but. There is a benefit to developing individual and chapter and group monitoring plans. And Dan just touched on that with a number of observations by chapter. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about developing a more strategic and intentional approach to using the app. If you talk about monitoring, what you want to focus on is what your objective is. What kind of information are you hoping to gather? What kinds of questions are you hoping to answer? And just as an example, are you looking for general water quality, habitat conditions, and spots where there's no information? Are you hoping to perhaps evaluate some local impacts? Are there feedlots? Is there intensive agriculture in the area? Are there tributaries which have impaired conditions? The other opportunity is to help agencies such as DNR to build on existing data and information. So you can kind of start up the pyramid and add value to agency monitoring programs as well. I'll give you a couple examples of that here in a minute. Or perhaps you want to compare pre and post restoration conditions in stream restoration reaches, such as this one on Pine Creek toward the bottom of our chapter jurisdiction here, pre and post on a restoration project. Next slide, Deanne. Our chapter location in the Driftless area is way up on the northern end. Our chapter covers Polk, St. Croix, and Pierce counties on the far west northwestern edge of Wisconsin. And because Pierce County is primarily in the Driftless area, we kind of picked on that county in 2019 when we ran a pilot project to test run the app. And next slide. So we thought it would be really helpful to develop a monitoring plan to get the best benefit out of the pilot project and obtain the most observations possible, involve the greatest number of anglers to get their feedback and interest, like Dan mentioned. So the project monitoring period we picked is April through October, basically what we call up here in the North Country, the open water season. And the app has some challenges in cold weather. So if you have below freezing temperatures, for instance, dip a test strip, the water freezes on the pads and you get color distortion. So we're basically focusing on those warmer months from April through October. And the conditions we want to represent as we go out monitoring are base flow, which is the predominant condition in a lot of these cold water streams that are groundwater fed. So what are the groundwater contributions and what is water quality like in that circumstance? The second major condition is when runoff conditions are occurring in a watershed is contributing pollutants from the landscape. And the two circumstances there is if we can catch spring snowmelt, and typically we try to catch rain events over an inch or so, which generally provides some sort of landscape runoff. Not always the case, but we found that that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Next slide. We also thought it would behoove our members to have a project coordinator so that we have someone to kind of herd cats across the landscape of Pierce County. And so we set up two groups of anglers. And those two groups, I believe Dan mentioned those already, are target anglers and general anglers. And I'll say a little bit more about both of those. Next slide. We identified 10 target angler monitoring sites within our Pierce County jurisdiction. They were on 10 different streams and rivers, and we tried to capitalize on some trout survey information that Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources traditionally collects at all of these 10 locations. So we superimposed our water quality monitoring sites on DNR's trout survey sites at all 10 of these streams and rivers. And Kiap-TU-Wish was also collecting water samples for water chemistry analysis via certified lab at Pine Creek and at the Trimble River. So we had 2 locations here. We could actually match up water chemistry data from lab situation with app observations just to see how they match up. And then having identified these locations, we put notice out to our chapter members, come adopt a monitoring site, first come, first serve. So we had 10 different folks who adopted these 10 sites. Next slide. And this map just shows the distribution of those sites across the landscape of Pierce County here. You see on the far western edge, the St. Croix River, and then in the southwest corner, the Mississippi River. A lot of these rivers and streams drain either to the St. Croix or to the Mississippi River or the Chippewa River, which is a major Mississippi River tributary. So we had pretty good distribution across the entirety of Pierce County. Next slide. So what did we ask the target anglers to do? I mentioned the project monitoring period. We encouraged them to collect base flow observations every month. So we had 7 monthly observations under base flow conditions. And then we also encouraged them to collect runoff observations when it was raining and flows came up and pollutants were being washed off the landscape. Now, keep in mind, this meant some extra work for the target anglers because typically our folks are angling under base flow conditions when the water isn't high, muddy. So what it meant in this case is they may have to make additional observations and additional trips to their monitoring sites to get this kind of information. But it's really important because this is when the impacts on water quality typically occur. So again, spring snowmelt was targeted and then rain events over 1 inch, just as a rule of thumb to give anglers some guidance in terms of when to expect to go out for runoff observations. We have USGS Kinnickinnick River flow gauge, which we can kind of use as an indicator of what flow conditions are like for streams and rivers throughout Pierce County. There's a rain gauge on that site as well. The City of River Falls operates a weather station with precipitation information. So basically we found we could leverage some of the additional monitoring work that was going on within our chapter jurisdiction as well to kind of guide these runoff observations. And then John or I would typically send email alerts out to our target anglers when we thought runoff conditions were happening. All right, next slide. We also wanted to test the crowdsourcing piece of this. So we identified general anglers and 28 participated in 2019, same project monitoring period, but we allowed them to monitor streams of their choice in Pierce County. Go where you'd like, take measurements while you're fishing, but we encouraged them to collect a minimum of 4 to 5 observations per angler. We didn't prescribe any balance between base flow and runoff observations, although we did encourage runoff observations. And again, typically it results in a visit simply to do the app observations as they may not be fishing. And alerts when runoff conditions were likely occurring. Next slide. We did provide some training. We had a formal session in the classroom in March of 2019 at University of Wisconsin River Falls, which worked out very nicely. We could bring everyone into the classroom, describe the app, make sure everyone could download it, run it through its paces. And we did the same thing at a Kiap-TU-Wish chapter meeting in April. And then for all the target anglers, we wanted to provide on-site training. So we met them at their designated sites, established specifically where we thought it was the best location to monitor, and provided some on-site training so that they were confident in their ability to make measurements. Okay, next slide. So in 2021, as Dan mentioned, this idea of monitoring plans spread to the Hiawatha chapter in Minnesota and Twin Cities Trout Unlimited in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And John Weiss in the Hiawatha chapter took on the role of project coordinator, very enthusiastic about this project. Their chapter also identified 2 groups of anglers, target and general. And next slide. At their 12 target angler monitoring sites, these are the 12 locations and streams, rivers that they ended up monitoring. Their plan, monthly monitoring, was encouraged, but according to John, these streams and rivers are monitored at least 3 times per year. And then next slide, the general angler monitoring sites, these folks roamed and monitored within the chapter jurisdiction and even a little bit outside of the jurisdiction, but these sites have been occasionally monitored since 2021. So in total here, they have been monitoring on 24 different streams and rivers that probably haven't had a lot of monitoring attention in the past. Next slide. And Twin Cities Trout Unlimited also became engaged in 2021. Jim Sauter's done a tremendous job as project coordinator. They also have 2 groups of anglers, target and general. And next slide. The folks that are monitoring are called stream keepers, which I thought was an interesting term. And they took a little bit different approach to target monitoring sites, and you can see the 6 that they currently are covering. They organized in teams, typically teams of 2 to 3 people assigned to each one of these target monitoring sites. And the benefit there is that all the burden doesn't fall on one person. So if that person is, say, gone on vacation for a couple weeks in August and misses a rain event or misses a monthly sample, someone else on the team can step up and cover. And Jim is a former school administrator and educator, so he tapped a high school administrator and students to cover their Eagle Creek monitoring site, and actually worked with them on training as well. So the benefit of a monitoring plan is it's intentional, it's strategic, and you can take it many different directions based on the expertise and interest of your chapter members. Next slide. These are just a couple photos. One is of stream keeper training sessions. So Jim organized these sessions in the field at monitoring sites to get people familiar with their locations and familiar with the app and its use. And on the right is a photo of one of their monitoring sites at Hay Creek, just south of the Twin Cities. And next slide. So just a word about general stream keeper monitoring. They have the same approach, and they're monitoring streams in a more random fashion and covering a much larger area. And in their case, because they don't have a lot of trout streams to fish in the immediate 7-county metropolitan area, they tend to wander. to many locations within the Driftless area, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and they've really done a great job of populating the map across the landscape. And TCTU is one of the largest chapters in the country. They have over 2,000 members. So you really see a great potential here for crowdsourcing as folks are out and about angling and have an interest in the health of their trout streams. Next slide. I think maybe it bounces back to you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Kent. Yeah, and so, I mean, with all that participation, especially driven by those 3 chapters that have formal monitoring programs, that's sort of where we've ended up today with a map of over 1,000 observations across the Driftless area. And again, you can sort of see that those cluster around those chapter geographies: Hiawatha, Windcrest, Twin Cities, Kiap-TU-Wish in the north, and we're lacking a little participation in those more rural areas in the southern Driftless, but we have a strategy to help fill in those gaps, and have tried to do some strategic outreach to folks both within the chapters and at some of the universities down there, and we'll continue to do so to try and fill in those sort of geographic gaps. But that was a static map, I think, that's in a report, but we do serve all of these data on a map, a web application that's available on mobileh2o.com/driftless program, where most of our information lives. So you can zoom around this map, click on points, look at the data, et cetera. Just another way to access it. But you can also, the app is downloadable for free, so you can download the app and actually query the database on the app itself, which is what these 3 screenshots are showing. The map on the left is just where bank erosion has been documented, along with a water quality observation. Those are shown in red. The ones in green, where an observation was made where no bank erosion was documented, and then the white are just no data were collected in this bank erosion field. So you can use the app and enter data in any of the fields. Some people focus on the test strip part and maybe leave some of these other fields blanks. Other folks, fill out everything that they can. So in some places we don't have any data, and others we do. The middle panel is showing sort of the distribution of phosphorus concentrations, where the green is 0 and the dark red are about the highest that you can get out of the test that the app is built around. And then that panel on the right is just what are the water conditions? Are the water conditions clear? Are they murky? Are they muddy? And couple that with the recent rainfall event information, you can start to understand that rain events cause murky water, not surprisingly, but it just gives you some background information on interpreting some of the water quality values that you have seen, because nutrients run off of fields with rainfall events, and you may see a high nutrient value in a place where you typically don't see a high value. So it's just ancillary data to help interpret the water quality information. And again, you can see you can query all of this on the app itself. You don't like the app, your phone is too small, you can jump over that web map that I showed on the previous slide, or it's on this slide also. But so our overall goals for this project, as you probably figured, are one is education, right? When you're out fishing, you can take an observation, the app will report what the values are, and it'll interpret that information and tell you what that means for streams and for fish. But it's also contributing to a regional database of coarse scale water quality information, and understanding where there are high nutrient levels or where there are disturbances to the stream channel, eroding banks, and things like that. And that can help sort of highlight reaches where there's a management need. So folks like Sarah and other partners, DNR, NRCS, the counties, can use these data to act. And the other aspect, I guess, is on the reporting side is, we have a couple data reports out. We're due for another one. But this figure on the right essentially just shows, the frequency of low observations for phosphorus and some high ones. So, generally we don't see much, above 0 or 100, but in a couple of cases there's some extreme values that have showed up, and they're on the map. And what we're I'll get to sort of how we're encouraging folks to act on those here in a minute, but I mentioned the data reports. We have the pilot report out. These are all available on mobileh2o.com/driftless. I think it's Driftless program, but not very hard to find. Their website's fairly simple and straightforward. We have 2 data reports from 2020 and 2021 data collection, and we're due for another one up through 22. And the goal is to basically develop a crowdsourced regional database of water quality information across the Driftless that's actionable. So we, after that map continues to get populated, including in places where we don't have a lot of data now, like the southern Driftless, we can understand a regional or get a regional picture of water quality. The individual data points are actionable, but when you look at things together, you may identify some hotspots or problem areas that probably need further investigation. And we're thinking about this in sort of a framework for action. So, we recognize that this test strip technology in the app built around the test strips is a coarse scale screening tool. So, when you get one red observation or high value, that doesn't mean someone asked us if they should immediately call their county commissioner. We said no. Maybe do some follow-up work and take, some additional measurements. But if you repeatedly see high values, then maybe move to, some water quality testing through a certified lab, like Ken mentioned that Kiap-TU-Wish is doing at some of their long-term sites. So, something with a little more detail, accuracy, credibility, and if it continues to be high, then then maybe reported to the regulatory agency or the relevant authority, depending on what state you're in. So, we're haven't laid this out in a document, but we need to. We're due for a data report. I think the data report will include this sort of information as to how can we use these data to act, and sort of talk and open up conversations with the regulatory agencies about potential problems. So we have, we've had goals all along. I think we wanted to hit 1,000 observations by the end of 2022. We did that by hitting 1,063 observations. We want to continue to encourage participation, encourage the use of monitoring plans for the chapters that want to go that route, but just encourage use in general. And I think we can actually get to 2,000 observations by the end of this summer, after we do our 2023 September blitz, and I'll, I guess, touch on that here on the next slide. But continued involvement by chapters, agencies, just anyone that's interested can download the app for free, and then purchase materials off of Mobile H2O's website, again, which is temporarily down because Carter is with Mobile H2O's out of country until July. So we're providing a backstop out of our Boise TU office here. Want to get to this sort of complete picture of water quality information across the Driftless. I think we can get to that 2,000 cumulative observation marks for this reason. One, we're running field crews to inventory road stream crossings for fish passage issues, flood flow capacity, and just general condition for infrastructure reasons, because there's a lot of interest in infrastructure lately. A lot of money coming down through the agencies. TU's been an important partner of those agencies to get that money on the ground to replace poorly designed culverts or road crossings. And we plan on, so we're trying to fill that gap this summer by running field crews and surveying culverts and bridges. But we're going to have these field crews collecting WISE H2O data along the way in, our target counties initially, or at least Jackson, Trempealeau, Crawford and Richland, but depending on the pace of the work, we might spill out to surrounding counties. Monroe has already inventoried their infrastructure. Vernon is about part of the way done, but depending on the pace of work, we could expand. We're planning on running at least one crew in 2024. So we're trying to essentially understand aquatic connectivity on the landscape. This map shows Monroe, which I just mentioned. They've already inventoried their road stream crossings. Vernon has a start, and we're going to be working to the north and to the south of those two counties to continue to fill in the gaps. One of the reasons we're investing in this effort is because we are going to put both the culvert survey data, the fish passage data, and the WISE H2O data to use in what we call a brook trout conservation portfolio assessment, which is essentially a mapping exercise that its base unit is using fish passage information to identify interconnected patches of habitat. So, if we know there's a barrier down low in the watershed, a barrier upstream, everything else is connected. We delineate that using this barrier information, call it a brook trout patch, and then we can summarize some additional information within that focal patch. And part of that is identifying whether the streams are impaired using both, the designated 303D list streams that are designated as impaired, but also this water quality information that we're crowdsourcing. So we've applied this assessment to brook trout in the east. All these little polygons you see on the map are interconnected patches of brook trout habitat that were delineated using fish passage information, and each patch is attributed with information on the brook trout population that occurs in that patch, as well as some of the habitat information, land use, water quality that we know influences habitat. So we've done this in the East Coast. We've applied it recently to the Great Lakes with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation as a funding partner. So same thing, the color scheme's a little bit different here, but the green essentially suggests that the brook trout information and the size of that patch, or the miles of stream between known barriers, suggests that patch is a brook trout stronghold. The red indicates places where there may be unique life histories, like coaster brook trout, for example, or brook trout that migrate between lakes and streams. But you can see this, the vertical aspect of this is using information on the habitat to identify whether habitat in these patches is impaired or not. And that's where we will not only rely on the 303D streams list, but also this water quality information to supplement that that information, like from the 303D list, identified impaired, which patches have impaired habitat, and then that will be used in sort of will result in a planning tool that can be used with Sarah and other partners in the Driftless area. So we've done the East Coast, we've done the Great Lakes, and we want to expand this assessment approach to the Driftless area too, focused on native brook trout, again, as an actionable sort of assessment that can help inform or identify restoration opportunities or identify needs within these interconnected patches of brook trout habitat. So, not only are the WISE H2O data actionable in and of themselves, they can highlight certain watersheds that may have problems, but they will feed directly into this sort of assessment that we plan on kicking off in 2024 after a field season in 2023 and 2024, inventorying where these fish passage barriers are, but also collecting water quality information along the way. So a good opportunity to crowdsource data that will feed directly into some additional science that will inform decision-making and management on the ground. This slide is representing some of the funders of the regional effort. The National Fish Habitat Partnership, which TU Dare gets some of that funding. Fish and Wildlife Service is an important partner. National Fish and Wildlife has funded some of TU's work and some of Kent's time to help on the monitoring side. So I think that's it. It's a, a piece of technology that lets people engage in understanding what's happening in the stream around them that they're fishing, but also contribute to a larger effort that will result in a database of actionable data that will feed into some assessment work that will ideally inform some planning across the driftless here in a couple of years. So we'll stop there and take questions. Mike, do we leave enough time for questions?
Yeah, that was great. So definitely appreciate both of you guys taking some time out of your day to come on and talk about this, and certainly piqued my interest and got me thinking about all the possibilities. Before we jump into, there were a couple of good questions in the chat box that I want to get to. And if folks online have questions, by all means, drop them in there. Before we get going in that, could you just real quickly go over the pieces of data that get identified with that test strip? Like what data is actually being recorded and inputted into the system? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so the top 5 here are what's leveraging the test strip technology. Dip a strip, put it on against a calibration card, and it has an algorithm to interpret those colors into values. They're still put in bins, so it's a coarse scale tool. The orthophosphate is a self-contained test strip based test. So you're taking a water sample, dipping the strip, but interpreting the color of that strip against a color ramp on the tube, and then entering the value that you see into the app. So it doesn't automatically upload like the first 5 here on this list, but everything from there down is, user contributed information, checking a box or selecting one of a couple different category options, or entering a temperature, in that field. So there's, a couple different ways that the app is collecting data, but some of it's user contributed. The test strip one is for those first 5 analytes. Okay,
gotcha. Yeah, that's good to know. So if somebody wanted to participate or get into this, do they need to check with you ahead of time to get set up? How do they go about getting the test strips and getting up and running?
Reach out. So we've had funding through DARE and through our Cold Water Conservation Fund Board, which funds some internal projects that have gone towards this, which has been part of contracts with Mobile H2O, and paid for some of Kent's time, I guess my time a little bit, but anybody can download the app. Mobile H2O, and I mentioned this a couple times, has a storefront that currently is down and not accessible because, again, they're a small mom and pop shop. Carter is doing some other consulting work in Nepal. He's out of country. We did a reach out to see who needed materials, and we organized that out of this Boise office. Did a batch order and basically became Carter's store temporarily. I think that will be up back in August. In the meantime, you can reach out to, and I'm going to put this in the chat, Gene Barney, who works in our science office here out of Boise, and you can CC myself, and we'll try and get you set up. When we were, fronting the payment of or purchase of these materials, we are asking people to spend a little bit of their own money, although it's subsidized with some of the grant money that we have. And let me hit send here. So gene.barney@tu.org, and my email is daniel.dauwalter@tu.org. And Gene can send you the order form. We do have plans to order another round of materials. And I should just pull up the sheet. Failing to remember the different kits. Let me pull those up here. So we're kind of replicating Mobile H2O Store, which essentially has 3 different kits. One is the basic kit. It has 5 5-in-1 test strips, 5 2-in-1 test strips. So I mentioned that table had 5 analytes that were collected using the test strip technology. Nitrate and nitrites are done twice. On the 5-in-1 test strip, it's a coarse measurement of nitrate, and the 2-in-1 test strip is a more precise test. The advanced kit here in the middle has 10 strips of each. Kent, I'm failing to remember the cost of the basic kit. Is it $12? I think the advanced kit might be around 20, and the premium kit, which has the phosphorus kit in 25 2-in-1, 25 5-in-1, and 25 phosphorus strips is $60. So that's the sort of the price of entry. Mobile H2O had their storefront open. It's closed temporarily, but we're handling some of that internally, and the emails can be found in the chat box there. Kent, did I miss anything on that?
Nope. I should also mention, because we started ramping this up in 2020, right on the front end of COVID, we tried to provide as much information as possible on the Mobile H2O website in the Angler Science Driftless Area section. So there is a comprehensive Get Started guide, which leads you through in great detail the whole process, how to download the app, how to make all the individual measurements, etc. So it was meant to be self-training, given the fact that we had a hard time getting around during COVID and providing on-site training.
Oh, that's great.
There's a video demo on the website. So both video and documented in a Word document.
Yeah, remind me, do you recall, or that's here? Yeah. Yeah, so mobileh2o.com is where to sort of is what I'm poking around on now on the screen. So there's how to use the app sort of things, and then this Driftless Area project. There's a 2019 page, a 2020 page, and a generic page at the top. But yeah, the training videos and stuff are pretty easy to find in there. It's a pretty shallow website in terms of the amount of content, so easy to navigate and find things if you poke around a little bit.
I'm curious with the data that's generated. Have either of you noticed, is this something that agencies that are managing our resources, I'm thinking like here in Wisconsin, our DNR, maybe the local fisheries biologists, is this information that they're interested in as well? Is there a mutual interest in seeing that? I really like the way you went about this, Kent, and like set it up so that those targeted monitoring sites were coinciding with the DNR annual trout survey sites. You could kind of, maybe if something went haywire in maybe a trout survey, you could go back and look at maybe the water quality, and maybe there was some sort of a correlation that you could draw a conclusion from. But has there been a lot of interaction with the agencies around this?
That would kind of be the intent ultimately. We wanted to gather enough momentum here and make enough measurements, and then post-COVID now provide some additional visibility for the data and coordination with the resource management organizations and agencies, and encourage them to use it, recognizing that it's screening level data that may point to issues and problems, but in terms of meeting state water quality standards, for instance, it isn't of sufficient accuracy for states to make those determinations of impairment, which they're charged to do every 2 years. But it's a great screening tool, especially in areas where the agencies don't have any information whatsoever on water quality condition.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So let's say I'm outside the Driftless, but maybe the thing that pops to mind, I know like folks in the Central Sands area, part of Wisconsin, heavily agricultural. They've got a really robust monitoring community set up. Like you talked about the other chapters having these streamkeeper programs. And I know those chapters there have the same thing set up. There's probably 60 or 70 people that are part of the Wisconsin or the Water Action Volunteer Network, that WAVE program, that are already going out to these sites and collecting data. Is there thoughts about expanding this beyond the driftless, or is that down the road, or is that something that we could start exploring now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have talked about it. We've been driftless focused for maybe a familiarity reason. Our funding, our proposals have been, we're driftless focused, but that doesn't mean there couldn't be an expansion. There's, a funding need from just the supplies. I think, a way to approach it would be to dip your toe in the water, buy a couple of kits, go put those in some different people's hands and collect some information to see if you think it's usable. The mobile H2O services realm. So we've gotten DARE money out of the National Fish Habitat Partnership to contract with Carter. So the app is free, the materials can be purchased on their website, and Carter's selling services as a consultant to do some report writing and do some back-end database management, QA, QC, those sorts of things that are sort of done behind the scenes to deliver accurate data. But anybody can download the app and you can buy stuff off their website, or at least until August you could reach out to us and we could try and get some materials into your hands just to sort of test drive things and see what it looks like. If you want to build out a bigger program, then I think that's a conversation with Carter and maybe me to start to see what that looks like and what the needs are, especially from Carter's end, mobile H2O end, and even from a staff time standpoint, because we're project funded at some level, and we've been tapping our Cold Water Conservation Fund Board to sort of kickstart this program with the idea that it will sort of take off on it and be a self-sustaining thing. So there could be, grant opportunities out there to kickstart something in other places. So
I could certainly
feel out what that looks like.
Yeah, I could certainly see a local chapter like taking the initiative and maybe going out and finding a small like community grant for $500 or $1,000 and loading up on test kits and sending 10 people out in the chapter territory to start collecting the data. I think it'd be a great thing to do. I had a question, and maybe you don't know this. I'm kind of curious, like, does it matter where you are in the stream, where you take the sample from? Like, I know when I used to do water monitoring through the WAVE program for a number of years, and there were certain things and we were measuring like dissolved oxygen and things like that, but there were certain things that you had to be like out in the middle, that they wanted you out in like the middle, or close to the middle of the stream to collect that data, where some things could be done on the 1/3 of the stream closest to the stream bank type thing. Does it matter where you're taking the water sample from with these test strips?
I think you should definitely be cognizant of picking a spot that is representative of the stream as a whole in that particular location. So oftentimes we reference the Thalweg, which tends to be the area of greatest flow and mixing at a particular location. So we kind of encourage our anglers to drift to those locations and avoid areas close to banks or backwater areas, which can make things a little bit unrepresentative, or immediately downstream from a tributary influence where mixing is not complete yet. So that's kind of the general approach in picking a site that provides representative data.
Sure, that makes sense. So we had an interesting question there. they're registered with they have a unique identifier number, and they mentioned that they upgraded their phone. Does that move over with the app? Maybe you guys don't know this, probably a question for the folks at Mobile H2O, but does that identifier number move over to your new phone when the app moves over, or is that?
I don't, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. That's a question for Mobile H2O or Carter. But we've been trying to, through some detective work, link the unique identifiers to individual people, because we have lists of participants, that we try and that's how we get to identifiers, to people, to chapters, in addition to where the points are taken. But I don't believe it transfers, but I'm not sure if I've downloaded the app recently and know if the setup has changed to where you can actually enter your name or email. I think that's part of it now, and there could be some matching that way.
Okay. So if somebody did like upgrade their phone recently, they should maybe check in with you guys and make sure that everything's recording the way you want it to.
Yeah, I think that would be a good question and issue for Mobile H2O. We're also hoping to work with them on a few app improvements, one of which would allow the user on the front end to enter their name and their chapter affiliation, so that we can capture that information on the front end. So I think to Ed's question, if he upgrades his phone, has to download the app again, he can actually enter his name, and there might still be a unique user ID assigned, but the name would also go with a new user ID if that's what happens.
Gotcha. This is an interesting question. Someone asked who determines what the optimum pH is for a particular stream. I don't know if we're at that point in this type of data collection. I mean, pH varies from, depending on the geology of the stream, right? But
well, that's an interesting question, because you'll see on the result for each of the test strip parameters a range from red to yellow to green, which, based on preponderance of scientific information and impacts on aquatic life, those zones are set. So in the instance of pH, for instance, the state agencies are charged to develop what are called water quality standards. Those are enforceable limits on concentrations for chemicals in surface waters. So for instance, for pH in Minnesota, which is where I've done most of my professional monitoring work, the state water quality standard for pH is 6.5 to 9. So the state assumes if pH is within that range, aquatic life is being protected across the spectrum. And I believe because of the nature of that parameter, probably every state in the country has a standard for pH. And I'm guessing there's a lot of similarity there within the driftless areas with the states of Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin as well. So it's kind of a combination of state water quality standards and best scientific information on what we know about impacts for that particular parameter. And Dan brought that screen up so we can see the yellow portions of the scale and where you hope your measurement lands in the green. The yellow is kind of heads up, and if you land on the red, make another measurement and kind of keep an eye on the site.
Yeah, it makes sense. So somebody asked if like how the test strips work, or how the colors interpreted, if it's like in between two colors, like is it pretty, I assume it's fairly accurate and kind of can tell what shade, whether it's shaded a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, like where it falls within the spectrum. But is there a science behind that?
The algorithm is proprietary. It's a Mobile H2O secret. But I know like the lighting condition thing, because the calibration card is going to be exposed to the same lighting conditions as the test strip, presumably it adjusts for that at some level. I know Carter has done a lot of work with the water quality lab at Boise State out here in Boise, to develop that algorithm and go through the testing process and look at the accuracy of the test strip data relative to some known quantities. In a perfect lab setting, I think there's maybe some fallback on that when you get outside into real world conditions, but that work has been done and along with developing the app itself.
Good. So it's not something that we really need to worry about. It's all somebody on the back end has kind of dialed that in already for us.
Yeah, as part of the pilot project and ongoing 2020, 2021, we actually took water samples at a couple sites, submitted them to a certified lab for accurate analysis of those parameters, and then did simultaneous observations with the test strips to look at how the app was performing and translating colors to concentrations under field conditions where you can maybe expect some interferences that you aren't getting in the lab. And for the most part, it turned out pretty well, but it also pointed out some shortcomings in terms of where the app wasn't putting the app measurements in the correct bins some of the time. So then that information went back to Mobile H2O, and they could kind of look at recalibrating that algorithm to better represent field conditions.
Yeah, that's great. I see Sarah Strassman did join us tonight. She dropped a comment in the chat box, so thank you for doing that, Sarah. For those of you who don't know Sarah, she's the new project manager for the Trout Unlimited Driftless Area restoration effort, what we refer to as TU-DARE. So thanks for doing that. She mentioned that the Wisconsin DNR is planning to collect some samples along with the samples that are being taken here to help with quality control in that regard. So that's good to see. Let's see here. Chris mentioned again, he missed it, like how much do the test strips cost? You guys said it was like the basic kit was like you get 10 test strips and it was probably like what, $12?
Yeah.
Or was it 5?
I think 12 for the basic, 17 or 20 for the advanced, and then 60 for the premium kit.
Okay.
I should have looked up those numbers while we were.
And an advanced kit would probably get you through a whole season, right?
If you were doing like a once a month at a particular spot, yeah.
I mean, that would cover once a month and then maybe 3 or 4 rain events.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And then the premium kit adds that orthophosphate test kit as well.
Yeah, so I guess that would be something to consider too, and maybe a question for the local chapters, or possibly a question for you folks at TU National, like how important is the phosphorus data going to be? When you start talking about using this data to analyze, like, or to build on that brook trout conservation portfolio, at some point, I guess we'd have to weigh like how valuable is that phosphorus data? How much of it? How many samples do we need to calculate to have it be relevant? It's an interesting question.
I guess I would just kind of point out that one of the reasons the Driftless Area was selected for this project was of the predominance of agriculture in the area. And with regard to nutrients, really phosphorus, particularly soluble or orthophosphorus, is really a driver for providing food for aquatic plants. And then nitrate nitrogen, of course, is a real concern as well. It's interesting that a lot of the phosphorus comes via runoff events, right? It's often adsorbed to soil particles, which get into the water. during runoff events, but a lot of the nitrate comes via groundwater inputs. It's soluble, so it easily goes through soil profiles, and with karst geology, it ends up in groundwater. So monitoring both of those parameters in different ways via groundwater and runoff, I think, is a really key part of this project. So pairing those two parameters is pretty important.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, guys, it's well after 9 o'clock. I'm gonna do let's do one more question. Somebody asked how long the test strips were good for, or if they have like an expiration date, or if you buy a pack of 10, and you only use 9 1 year, can you hold them? Can you use that extra one the next year?
So the batches that we buy have expiration dates on them. So you'll have to be cognizant of those expiration dates, and we really recommend that you use them before those expiration dates and not afterwards, because if they aren't kept in a dry condition, those pads will pick up atmospheric moisture, humidity, and start to turn color even in the test containers, and especially if they're removed from the desiccant. So between that situation and the expiration dates, that's really something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I want to say like what we've seen recently, I think the expiration is a year and a half out.
Yep. Yep.
So, last year, maybe plus some, but depending on when it comes out of the, manufacturer and into people's hands, that, could be six months of wiggle room there, maybe.
All right, that sounds great. I will leave it open. Kent, Dan, any final comments or remarks you want to leave us with?
Happy to have you involved in the driftless, but if you want to, if you're outside the driftless and thinking about sort of special use cases, reach out. And like I said, I think it's worth a dip your toe in the water sort of approach, and maybe download the app and order a small kit, which you can do directly through us temporarily till the mobile H2O storefronts back up. And just see what it looks like, gauge interest from your chapter, whomever, whatever group you're going to work with, and test drive it a little bit before jumping all in.
That sounds good.
Yeah,
Oh, hey, Kent, go ahead.
Just like to thank you, Mike, for the
Yeah.
opportunity to present. Thanks to all who attended tonight, and we encourage your participation. It's a pretty powerful tool to plug a lot of gaps in the waterscape across the driftless area and elsewhere. So we just encourage your participation.
That sounds great. Thanks again for both of you for being on tonight, and I'll make sure we get this up on our YouTube channel for folks who weren't able to join us live, that they can chime in and tune in and check it out. So hopefully we get you some new participants in the coming year, and it'd be great to see this program expand. So thanks again, everybody. We'll be back. We've got one more episode of Talking Trout. In May, we'll be talking about public lands, and specifically the stream bank protection program, and the easement program with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So check that out first week in May, and then we're going to take a break for the summer, and we'll come back in the fall with another slate of presenters and topics. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you all next time. Thanks, Kent. Thanks, Dan.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank
Mike.
you.